EMR 504, Module 3. Let me just get this going. All right. Today we're going to look at sociocultural factors in literacy. Specifically, we're going to start to look at culturally responsive teaching strategies. This is really important when you look at the final project for this course. It's really important that you understand these concepts. So really what I want to do today is kind of give you the broader framework. How did we come to our understanding of culturally responsive teaching? I want to look at how this looks in the classroom and in the curriculum and what this teaching looks at, and sort of begin your preparation for the final project for the course. Okay, so the first thing I want to tell you is that the most important underlying sort of learning theory for culturally responsive teaching really comes from constructivism, which is a learning theory that probably many of you are familiar with. It's this idea that we construct our own learning from the world around us. Really, at its core, constructivism works in the premise that what we learn really is a function of the content of what we learn, the context of where we learn it, and the activities that we engage in that help to hopefully come together and help us to achieve the goals of the learning. Learning is a personal process. We construct meaning in that process. We do a lot of meaning making, and it cannot be shared, but rather it can be compatible. What I learn in a constructivist classroom is going to be very unique to me, and what you learn in a constructive classroom is going to be very unique to you. However, we want to build a constructivism classroom that is compatible so that people are able to find themselves within the learning context. All right. I liked this, a little Homer Simpson humor here, right? Constructivism is grounded in the work of John Dewey, whose influence in modern education reform really you probably would say is without dispute. His pivotal work, How We Think, which was published in 1933, explores the natural processes that humans engage in order to learn. He states that the tradition, instruction, and experience all contribute to what we pick up. So we bring into the classroom thoughts and beliefs, even if we're unaware that we believe that we bring those in. So if we think that this is important, if we've been taught that this is important, we're going to see it as important in the classroom. Essentially, Dewey is arguing that the process of thinking is so natural and effortless that we often engage in it without even realizing that we're doing it. In what he calls the grounds for beliefs, he insinuates that people engage in reflective thought by grounding their new learning in what is already known. So even a child coming into a kindergarten classroom has knowledge that they're bringing into the classroom, and we have to ground that new knowledge into that previous knowledge. He suggests that academic learning has to be active, and it allows students to actively engage with problems and solutions, often typifying important social situations that become the basis for natural learning. That is, if the learning can become grounded in things that they know. So let's say a chemistry classroom could be grounded in, say, a discussion about cooking and how cooking works. That is where really effective instruction is going to happen. So new learning occurs when an experience becomes problematic, when things that they thought that they knew about the topic can't explain what they're doing in the classroom, and it's when they have to reconcile that problem. I don't understand. It's the reconciling of existing understanding to the experience that they're having in the classroom that forces the learner to sort of reorganize their thinking and really allow for some new ideas to be part of their social constructs. Dewey's theory was really a strong complement to work of Jean Piaget, who comes at about 15, 20 years out after Dewey. Piaget, you may recognize, was the one who came up with these ideas of stages of learning, and often as teachers, we're really conscious of the fact that if we're working with, say, very young children, we really can't expect them to be able to do some of the complex abstract thinking because they're still in the pre-operational stage, and so they're only able to develop like symbolic thinking, like maybe imaginative play, things like that. And so what we need to know is in the Dewey theory is that the teacher becomes a mentor who stimulates initiative and research among her students. So given where your students are developmentally, the teacher's job then is to give them experiences that they can incorporate to reconstruct their thinking and maybe rediscover and learn something new. For Piaget, the new learning happens when a learner's experience cannot be easily assimilated into their existing schema, and the learner must therefore make an accommodation. So let's say students come in with an understanding about dogs, a young child, their dog, they only know the type of dog that they have as their family pet, that's their understanding of dog, and then they come into your classroom and suddenly you're reading a story about Balto, and they didn't realize that dogs could be sled dogs, or they didn't know what an Alaskan Husky would look like, a Malamute Husky. And so those are things that so then it's that previous knowledge then has to be assimilated with the new information, and that's very important. So Dewey and Piaget's theories become the basis for cognitive constructivism, a belief that meaning is constructed when a child engages in a cognitive task that stimulates and challenges them. And so what they both kind of really emphasizes the idea that we need to know what our students know, what they bring into the classroom so that we can build off of them. Really, it is Russian linguist Lev Vygotsky, who I'm sure many of you have probably heard of as well, with the zone of proximal development and things like that. But he turns this into the concept of constructivism into social constructivism. It's not just about how the student thinks, but it's also the social and cultural influences that kind of play a role in the thinking, the learning that the student is able to do. So he acknowledges Piaget was correct in identifying cognitive stages for students, but he expanded that idea by saying that students can learn through social interaction with people who are more knowledgeable other. That's what he called the zone of proximal development. And he calls that zone the distance between a child's actual development and his or her potential. So he believes that this can be engaged when a child's prior concepts are challenged through social interaction, and that the learner needs the support of a more knowledgeable other. Whether social or cognitive constructivism, all these thinkers have in common the idea that learning comes through an interaction of the learner, the tasks, and a belief that has an important implication in a language classroom. Vygotsky's theories, in turn, became the basis for social constructivists who believe that groups to which a learner belongs impact their learning because we learn from individuals or groups with whom we identify. So now suddenly it becomes really, really important for us to understand our students' identity and help them to feel that identity is validated in our classroom. All right, so this is a learning theory, but it has tremendous implications on teaching. Among the guiding principles of both constructivism, both social constructivism and cognitive constructivism, is this idea that a teacher must pose problems that have to have relevance to the students, that have to structure learning, and that have to be around the concepts, the focus of the learning, the curriculum, if you will. In both ideas or both concepts of constructivism, they have to that the child has to feel valued, their point of view has to be accepted, the curriculum has to be adapted to address their suppositions and to assess their learning in context. Therefore, in a constructive classroom, it is a job of the teacher to create enabling contexts in which the learner is oriented to a need or a problem, and then the learning is framed around those needs or problems. While this is true of all constructive classrooms, its implications in the language classroom, whether you're talking about the teaching of reading or literature or the use of language to learn content areas, it's very, very significant. As a high school teacher, especially as a high school English teacher, I generally approach my students' ability to make meaning of a text as sort of an intersection between the learner and the text. Thus, language becomes the vehicle in which that construction happens, the concepts and relationships are built and organized. So according to Claude Shannon, words alone do not convey meaning, but they're merely the code for creating that meaning. So it's really, really important for us to understand that words can have different meanings, or can mean something slightly different for one group from the other. And so it's, we need to understand that the meaning of words are not fixed necessarily. Comprehension means relating new experiences to already known, and learning is changing or elaborating on what is already known. So language becomes important because it's the way in which experiences are shared, and reading comprehension is a process of making meaning between the text and what the reader has personally experienced or personally understands. It's a very personal process. In addition, new comprehension can facilitate later learning because the learner's background is expanded, allowing even more constructs to be created. So that is, the very act of reading changes the learner because they're gaining new information, and then they're using that new information to engage in new learning. So in a constructivist-oriented classroom, language instruction would be geared towards big ideas rather than sort of isolated skills. In their book, Search for Understanding, the Case for Constructive Classrooms, Jacqueline and Martin Brooks suggested some underlying principles to constructive teaching. These include presenting information holistically, with students engaging with the content in a multitude of ways, inquiry, research, and discussion, for example. In addition, a constructive language classroom will include experiences that encourage students to use inquiry as a means of tracing their comprehension of the reading and in order to challenge their current concepts. So we really want to get them questioning the text, questioning their own experiences and assumptions. In short, the constructive teacher seeks the students' conceptions and their understandings of relevancy as important to the reading tasks. It doesn't mean, however, that the relevancy is automatic. We can't assume that our students are going. We may think it's relevant to them, but we cannot assume that they're going to understand that it's relevant. So when I was in a high school classroom, I needed to help my students to see the relevancy of the reading, why it was a good idea for us to be reading what we're reading, and use that as sort of an entrance point into the reading. So when I taught something like Hamlet, I would talk about this idea of, well, many of us are from homes where our parents have divorced, or we've lost a parent, and then our parent gets remarried, and think about how difficult that is, and Hamlet's in the middle of that transition, and then it's through that sort of relevancy that my students maybe start to engage and consider this really foreign idea or this really foreign character of Hamlet in the play. So this brings us to culturally responsive practice. So culturally responsive practice comes out of the work of Ladson-Billing, and it's a natural extension of the theories that emerged before it, and it really sort of starts to bring up the markers of good teaching. So in here you can see some of the markers that they talk about. Principles for building a learning community: relationships precede learning. Knowing your students and having a good relationship with your students is critical to supporting them in their learning. And so how do we do that? There are things like affirming their cultural connections, inviting them, having a classroom that is culturally and physically and culturally inviting. So if I have students if I have brown-skinned students in my classroom, my posters include brown-skinned people in them. Students are reinforced for academic development. That is, we help to understand what they bring, what skills they bring. It's not just a gap, what they can't do. We also start to think about what they can do well. Certain communities have strong oral traditions, and so you can use those strong oral traditions to help to begin to your literacy instruction. And then instructional changes are made to accommodate differences. You don't treat every class the same. You kind of accommodate, so you don't, year to year, the makeup of your class is slightly different, and you sort of make changes to invite everybody into the curriculum. Classroom is managed with a firm, consistent, and loving control, and then interactions stress collectivity as well as individuality. So you want students to understand, I have a diverse student population. I want them to understand, and that could mean, by the way, they could be diverse even if they all are the same quote-unquote ethnic background or cultural background, because they all have different experiences. And so we want to value both what we as a as individuals bring to the classroom, but also how we as a collective, how we as a community can forge new relationships. Okay, so I'm going to show you a very quick video. It's about 5 minutes, and I want you, as you're watching this, I want you to think about, why do teachers have to understand their own culture and their own perspectives before engaging in culturally responsive teaching? What would it look like in your own setting with your students to be culturally responsive? And what role does language have in building a culturally responsive community? So let me go ahead and play this.
In the building, and then our new staff are fresh out of college. And
here, I get the big, sorry.
And I guess they thought they were prepared to deal with a diverse population. And then they got here and met the kids, and they're not.
As you've said before with your background, I came from a very strong, all-white Catholic schools background, and then my first 5 years in teaching were in the Catholic schools as well, all white. And then when I came into the public schools, it was a world of difference for them and for me, and I had to learn how to relate to a lot of my children.
Can you know me, and can you know what I see? What I see, what I see. Yeah.
Welcome to this course on becoming a culturally responsive teacher. This class is going to take us into that journey, very personal journey around what it means, first of all, to be culturally competent on that personal journey, and then the professional journey of what it means to be a culturally responsive teacher in our classroom. Sometimes when we talk about diversity, people just automatically think race. Right? That's key. Race is key. We're going to talk a lot about race here. But we need to realize that there is no child in your classroom or mine who doesn't come with a whole set of differences. I think one of the most powerful strategies that we have is that young people, the students that we work with, that they have a sense that this teacher in this classroom, at this moment of my life, believes in me, sees me, respects me. So this is the doorway that I think culturally responsive teachers can create through belief, and then the primary vehicle for that is through relationship.
The biggest part of anything you do as a new teacher is going to be about building relationships at the beginning, because you can't teach anybody if you haven't built the relationships, and the classroom climate is not warm, the kids don't feel safe, and the kids don't feel like a unit.
What do you think happens when kids feel pressure not to be who they are in school? What happens to their academic energy?
It goes down.
So this is sort of the formula that we're building here, that the cultural competence of the adults is intimately connected to achievement.
So when we talk about culturally responsive teaching, when we talk about cultural competence, what we're talking about developing teachers to be able to have strategies to engage students in instruction.
What does it actually look like in the classroom? And for that, we're going to shift our attention to what I call the 7 principles of culturally responsive teaching.
Just building the relationship with them the minute they walk in the door, checking on them, making sure they're okay, listening to the little one talk about her boo-boo that she had on her elbow, just listening to their stories, and then making sure they all feel safe and know that it's a safe environment for them to get started. Good morning, Genesis. Oh, how beautiful. I love them.
I made a conscious effort to go around my room and like the things that I have decorating my room and whatnot. Let's be a little bit more representative. So I have 27 different countries to choose from that I can plaster my walls with. But then I also involve the kids' personal cultures too. I have graduation photos, prom pictures.
At the beginning of the year,
Okay.
I allowed them to come up with the rules of engagement. That's what we call it. Okay, we have rules of engagement.
And they emerge from them.
They help manage that.
Okay.
Okay, what works best? What looks best in group work?
Yes.
As a teacher, as your teacher, what do you need? What do you want from me?
I think we as teachers get wrapped up into what I have to teach them, what standard I have to give to them. This workshop makes you look at what your students have to teach you.
I think what Gary Howard brings is the fact that he is a reflection of the majority of teachers, and that they're not being preached at. They're being talked to about looking at teaching and culturally responsive teaching from a different perspective.
My mindset totally changed and how I could use that diversity to my advantage, and use it to enrich the learning that was going on in my classroom and my school.
I'm from the children who fight and hate. I'm from sagging pants with hustlers filling them. I'm from struggle to wealth. I'm from where everything costs. I am happiness. I am success. I am Renee.
Did you notice that they used the I am from too? I thought that's pretty cool. All right, so let's present from here. Let's see, hopefully this will be the right one. Okay. All right. So now before you move on, and I want you to start to think about why do teachers have to understand their own culture and their own perspective before engaging in this type of teaching and learning? What would it look like in your setting with your students to be culturally responsive? And what role does language have in building that culturally responsive classroom? So these are questions that we're going to keep looking at and we're going to keep grappling with in this particular course, and I want you to continue and really dive into them. So hopefully this will give you some background, and I've got some references here. Well, this will give you some background as you look to consider your final project. Everything is on the under the coursework tab, loaded onto Leo, and hopefully you're starting to see things sort of connect together, and you're starting to see how what we know about teaching and learning, which I'm pretty sure that you probably learned as an undergrad about your constructivist learning. I'm sure you learned about Piaget and Lev Vygotsky. Well, this is really just, it's a natural progression, and it's a natural complement to those things that we already know and do as teachers. So after this assignment, or after this video, the next thing you're supposed to do is look at a example of a program. It's a case study in Hawaii, which maybe we can all volunteer to go to Hawaii and help out with this. But it's a case study in Hawaii to show you what culturally responsive practices when it's embraced in an entire school community, what it might look like. And again, it's just trying to help us to shape this understanding. And then you'll see that there's also a link to just the first chapter of a book through ASCD, which is an organization that is really charged with looking at curriculum and a leading voice in curriculum reform, and what you're supposed to be thinking about and bringing all of this together and sort of synthesizing your experiences. So check Leo under the coursework tab to get exact assignments, but hopefully you're starting to see some synergy about what we're doing. Thank you and have a good day.